Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as always by Mr. Tucker Hazel, and today we're here to talk about Monster Hunter, because we have
It's
both...
the talk of the town.
It is a talk of the town. It's talk of the town, I believe. Monster Hunter Wilds on Steam peaked at 1.3 million in change
Crazy
players.
like that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the sixth highest concurrent player count ever in the history of Steam. 8 million copies of the game sold in the first weekend. Capcom's fastest selling game ever. We're recording this on the 11th, so it's certainly well clear of 10 million copies at this point.
That's insane.
Yeah,
That's insane.
Yeah, it's an interesting moment for Capcom and for Monster Hunter, more particularly in its sort of continued ascension from this hyper niche IP that Capcom started on the PS2 generation to the point that now where it is. So on a just objective level, one of the biggest gaming phenomena of the modern era. And we've both played it. We've both played quite a bit of Wilds. We both have differing experiences with Monster Hunter, and we both kind of have different thoughts on the series. And so,
different thoughts on the series, yes, but I do want to frame all of this through as much subjectivity, Tucker horseshit as we can get. This is my experience with this one game. I have not played any other Monster Hunter game, so I have no commentary on the rest of the series.
Let's be clear, Tucker, what is the premise of this video?
The premise of this video is I really do not care for Monster Hunter Wilds.
Sure.
Again, I don't know if I would care much more or less for the other games. I haven't played them myself, so I reserve judgment. But from the 10 hours I played of this game, which I think is fair enough for an amount of time to put into a game before you decide if it is for you or not.
I'll give an opinion after 15 minutes.
That's true. I'm a little more thorough. I don't like much about this game at all.
Sure.
And I found it to be a very disappointing experience for me personally, as, again, my first time getting into the series. And maybe it's an expectation that I sat upon myself of, new Monster Hunter game is coming out, has all these quality of life stuff, it's going to be big, my friends are going to be playing it, this is the perfect time to get in. And it definitely was. But I was certainly let down and disappointed with the experience because I wanted to love it. I wanted to be in that environment. I wanted to be, checking in every night with you, doing hunts, getting into the flow of it. And I found the game pushing me away so strongly at each point that I like every time I would check in. I think I probably played it 5 or 6 nights in a row for a couple of hours each. That I decided before even finishing the core campaign, I did about 3/4 of it, I think. I decided to put it down. I'm like, this is not for me. I had a breaking point, and I'm like, I don't need to do this. I played a good enough chunk of this game to know that it's not something that I want to put my time into, especially because there were and are a lot of games releasing around that. So I am done with Monster Hunter Wilds. That doesn't mean I won't pop in for a hunt, if we make a big fucking to-do out of it. But my first blush with Monster Hunter through Wilds is not very good.
Sure. I thought you were going to go into a point. I want to just share where I'm coming at it.
That was my summary.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
My first Monster Hunter game was Monster Hunter World, which, to be honest, I don't even really remember how much I played. I got it at release and played for some period of time. I didn't have any friends in high school.
True.
I didn't have any friends that played Monster Hunter. So I was playing that by myself. And then I got into the series more with Rise, which I still didn't play a ton of, but I at least played a more solid amount of. And at that same time, that game came out when we were in college. One of my best friends is a massive Monster Hunter fan. He's been playing since the PSP era. And sort of through him, through osmosis, I gained so much knowledge about, understanding about what Monster Hunter is, what it has been, what it became. And between that and between Rise, I kind of got my foot in the door a little bit. And then Wilds just came out. I am 31 hours into Wilds. I am at the end of the high rank series of quests. I'm not quite finished yet. I'm about to start chapter 5 tonight. When I finish that, I'm going to go play Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate on 3DS, which I picked up.
Sure.
And I also picked up Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate because Capcom clearly knowing that Switch players have FOMO, put every Monster Hunter game on Switch at a deep discount. So I didn't have that. I picked that up. I guess my TLDR is that not only am I having quite an outstanding time with Wilds myself, it has sort of been an opportunity for me to get into the series in a sort of wider way. Not only loving this, but sort of finding this opportunity to get into the history of Monster Hunter and appreciate it.
Because you also played a little bit of Try?
I played... Yeah, in the lead up to Wilds, I played Monster Hunter Portable 3rd.
Okay. Oh, there was a 3 in there. Hey, I wasn't that far off.
Yeah, it was a third generation Monster Hunter game on PSP, only in Japan.
Yeah.
But I played a fan translation of it because it is like one of the sort of easier entry points into classic Monster Hunter. And between really, really having a great time with that and only stopping because Wilds came out, and now being almost done with Wilds, I have all these other older Monster Hunter games to queued up so I can get deeper into them. But we're mostly going to talk about Wilds, obviously, because that's what we've both been playing.
It's the only one I haven't touched on for. And again, I'm not slandering the series on whole. I don't know what I would think of the other games, and so this is really a Wild specific conversation.
Well, I guess one thing I'll say that's not Wild specific at all, just to spite you, I guess, I don't know.
Sure.
Was that it was quite interesting for me playing Portable 3rd right before jumping into Wilds. I played 15 hours of Portable 3rd.
Holy shit.
So
in 4 or 5 days? Good gravy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so in the scope of playing Monster Hunter, 15 hours is not very much. In the context of it as a sort of way for me to wrap my head around the differences between what Monster Hunter was and what it became, it was really instructive. And I sort of found a lot in that I really enjoyed, that I'm really excited to get deeper into playing Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. And I also found a lot to appreciate about the Monster Hunter games I have more familiarity with. World, Rise, now Wilds. So I kind of find myself like in this weird place where most of my experiences with the new games, but the people I've surrounded myself with in my life are very much Monster Hunter old heads. I have a lot of people that I know that would be classed that way. So I kind of walk in both worlds, I guess, and kind of have this dual appreciation, I think, for both styles. And it's just been a fun opportunity for me to use Wilds as not only just like an opportunity to play one game really extensively, but more broadly approach the series, which is not something I often get the opportunity to do, because a lot of these big legacy series that I jump into, I'm familiar with in a more acute way than I'm with Wilds. So that's kind of a sidebar. That's like a different thing about finding a new series and going back in time. So
I'm glad that you dove into that, because this is probably the only time we're going to talk about this game. And so having it in video writing, written in lightning. Yeah. As I think Woodrow Wilson said about Gone with the Wind, Or no, that was Birth of the Nation. Whatever. We don't need to bring that up here.
No, I don't think we need to bring that into conversation here today. Where do you want to start talking about Wilds?
I think maybe since you are familiar with what this game specifically has changed, because I think one thing I think is really interesting about Monster Hunter Wilds is it is a game that is clearly angling from its design and changes versus the old ones to be more accommodating to new players, to have a lot of different quality of life. There's a lot of, from what I know, sort of small changes that sort of add up to this being a markedly different experience. And in those quality of life things, I think I'd maybe like to talk about those, about what makes this game different, and then use that as a conversation sparking point of me to be like, why I appreciate maybe what this game does, but maybe still don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me it kind of invites two questions. The first is whether this was actually a good entry point into the series or not for somebody like you who is totally fresh to it. But then I think sort of it's not even really a question B, it's almost like a macro question we can return to at the end, which is like, as I said, my first game was World. I didn't really that game didn't change my life, right? I was certainly more apathetic towards it than I am, as I would sort of describe myself now, intensely positive towards Monster Hunter. I'll be curious whether you find yourself over time, as I did, sort of the snowball rolling down the hill,
and that's
gathering interest.
That's something I've actually been thinking a lot about. As I've shared some of my thoughts on our Discord server and on Twitter about the fact that I wasn't really having that great of a time with Wild, there's been a lot of response, and I think this is at least an interesting talking point of that many people have a very hard time getting into Monster Hunter. Even people who are longtime fans now remember back to their first experience, whether that is the first game they played or the first few years they were trying it, and similar to what I'm experiencing, finding it very alienating, finding it difficult to get your head around because it's structured and paced very differently from most games. And so what I will say is that I am not done with Monster Hunter. It is something that I find compelling enough, and it is obviously popular enough to where I do want to be able to understand it. And I'm not happy that seem to be on the other side of the coin, because this game is immensely popular, very well reviewed, all that stuff. And so it is certainly possible that if I revisit Worlds, if I give one of the older games a try, if there is another game that comes out in a couple of years, because of course they have the Rise team that either might be working on this or working on another game, it's hard to tell, that I do become a Monster Hunter fan down the line. But I also think it's important to not hold yourself accountable for what you might think in the future. And so I will posit this under, I might be in the future, but I'm not now. And so that's what we're going to be talking about.
So it's interesting what they've opted to do with Wilds, because World, obviously, in getting myself in and getting many people in, I believe World was Capcom's best-selling game.
I think so, yes. What would have beaten it?
Or sorry, I phrase it like that because Wilds will become that.
Oh, sure, but it's not yet.
No, World still is.
But you're right, it will be.
And so that game already sanded down.
Your brain is like 9 months in the future.
I guess so. World already sanded down.
Outing yourself as a time traveler. You're like, oh, shit,
I wish. God, I would be doing so many more interesting things than making YouTube videos if I was a time traveler.
Well, if you can only travel 9 months into the future.
That's not that exciting. I could leak when Lego sets are going to release.
Lego sets, Christ.
But World already sanded down a lot of edges compared to the formula before. A big, very apparent one is that the old Monster Hunter maps prior to World were not continuous areas. You had and you still have numbered areas on the maps, but each was its own distinct zone, and there were loading zones connecting them. So World kind of made it this bigger, more cinematic game, both in its gameplay but also in its storytelling. And the storytelling has certainly been doubled down on quite significantly in Wilds. Rise's story was very much backgrounded. Again, I've not played Rise since the year of its release, so my memory is a little bit foggy, but it doubtlessly was not in its structure, and its story structured like this. So in terms of this game, I think that Capcom clearly understood that the momentum that the series had picked up from World in particular, Rise was obviously also huge, particularly because it was on a handheld in Japan. They knew or thought that the right thing to do for Wilds was to make this game even more accessible. And I'm not positing that as a positive or negative, but it's pretty clear when you look at a lot of the changes made here that was the goal. A lot of things, including making the low rank of the game into a much more linear, scripted, cinematic campaign. Things like letting you carry 2 weapons at once, stripping away a lot of the actual hunting mechanics, not just from pre-World Monster Hunter, but also from World Monster Hunter. Introducing the Sacred that can take you around the areas, making the world bigger, sort of in an era where I think players are really captivated by an open world.
Definitely.
There's a lot that has been done, both evident to anybody and evident to longtime Monster Hunter players. And while this is a game that is certainly very highly regarded, I don't think it would actually be accurate to say that it's a universally beloved game. particularly not among people who are really, really into Monster Hunter, who have spent a lot of time listening to speak about this game, both on YouTube, but in my personal life as well.
Sure.
So it circles back to that question that I think is worth starting with, which is, was this even a good entry point to begin with? And to me, I think that the answer is, well, I don't really know if another game would have been better.
That's what I find so fascinating about this game.
Yeah.
Is because everything you just mentioned, you're right. I mean, this is a well-received game. The reviews were high. It was mixed on Steam because there was like PC issues. We're not familiar with those. But it is a popular game and people are enjoying it. And that doesn't mean that there isn't conflict. But when you say these elements of controversy or conflict, it is mostly from people who are intimately familiar with the series, and a lot of the changes made here to be more accommodating also mean they are changing some of the elements that older fans might have really, really enjoyed about those games. But I think you're right. What would there have been another game that would have been better for me to start with is a question that I don't know. I can't really answer. I haven't tried the other ones, but it'll be interesting to see once this game's legacy forms a little bit more fully, how it then may or may not create a divide in terms of what types of Monster Hunter fans there are. Because as far as I know, people who are playing this for the first time, getting into the series with this, which are, of course, probably millions of them, are very much enjoying this game for some of the changes that you mentioned that you made, like the sacred and the multiple weapons. Like these things, I'm like, I can't imagine liking the game more without the sacred, more without being able to switch between multiple weapons, more with like closed off areas that you have to work between or whatever. These are things that do appeal very strongly to the modern gamer, and I think we may be looking down the barrel of a sort of pre-Breath of the Wild, post-Breath of the Wild Zelda fan, where it's like, and now it would be like pre-Wilds, post-Wilds Monster Hunter fans, where there's different kinds of fans. But I am glad that I started with this game because a lot of the changes that it made that I was just mentioning, I'm like, well, I know that's going to help me like the game more. And whether, I mean, again, I have not actually played the other games, but it certainly made me more interested in trying it out because it seemed like, okay, they're listening to the things that new players would be wanting out of the game. And I do think that they add them, whether they were successful or not, is up for debate. But they definitely took a lot of interesting cues to widen the appeal of the game.
I think widening the appeal is the key point, because our good friend Brendan was talking about the progression of the Monster Hunter series in his Discord community for his channel, The Crawl, which people should go check out. And he was talking about there being this tendency to look at the changes that a game like Wilds makes as improvements when they sort of instead suggest simply a different approach to Monster Hunter. Because going back and playing, again, the limited amount of portable third I did and getting a feel for how this game's operated in the past, to me, I don't actually view it as linear. I actually think that the Zelda comparison is quite good because I don't look at, personally, Breath of the Wild as a linear improvement on even my favorite of the Ocarina of Time style Zelda games, Wind Waker. It's simply a different approach to the concept. And so I think that there would be an intrigue in you trying out some of the older games alongside me even, and we can play some together.
Good chance.
Just because it's interesting the way that Capcom has opted to, in some ways, fundamentally change Monster Hunter. In the hope of attracting a bigger audience. I think a key difference, in my view, and something you had actually mentioned to me one of the times we were hunting together, was that you were invoking FromSoft games, and it was in the context of difficulty. But I think that FromSoft is a sort of an interesting touchstone for what Capcom is opting to do with Monster Hunter in general, where FromSoft games are obviously many things, but sort of among their top accolades is certainly their incredible boss battles. And Monster Hunter Wilds, even more so than its other modern contemporaries in Monster Hunter Gen 5 with World and Rise, is interested.
Just for context, is Wilds not a new generation?
No, it's Generation 6.
Okay, sorry. I see what you're saying.
But there's like a new era and an old era, and the new era started with World.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I know that. Yeah. I'm not stupid.
The way that this game is so interested in funneling you directly to the boss monster, and not having sort of the need to track monsters for the most part, not having you need to slay smaller monsters for the most part, collect materials and craft for the most part. It is
in that low rank area.
I think it's setting the expectation for new players who are attuned to games that took cues from Monster Hunter in the first place, like Dark Souls, to come to a game like Wilds for these big one-and-done spectacle fights where you kill the monster, you feel the satisfaction of killing the monster, you go to the next one, until you've seen all the monsters. When in reality...
That's definitely how that 15-hour campaign is structured.
Totally. In reality, there's not a single monster in the game that there's like one that I've barely fought, but the overall majority of them I've fought at least a half dozen times each. And the satisfaction, in my view, is from everything you learn in those repeat fights.
Sure.
But the way Capcom has the game structured, I don't think suggests that really.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's definitely a conversation I'm sure they had a lot. They went really deep into this as they were designing. Is like, would it be better for the accessibility, potential popularity of the series to structure that first low rank campaign, as we'll probably just refer to it, with repeat boss fights, because we know that's technically more representative of like the greater scope of the series and what you'll be doing over the course of dozens and dozens and dozens of hours. And obviously what they opted to do is introduce you to each of these boss battles in a linear order that does, I think, have a pretty solid progression in terms of how complicated they are, and they each have sort of a build-up of like the characters sort of talking about like, oh, why are we scared of this one? And then you're thrown into this boss battle and you have to take it down. That, to me, is another area where my disconnect from the rest of the series, I think, is actually still helped by the wild structure. Because some of my least favorite parts of playing this game were fighting the monsters again. And this also comes down to a difference in gameplay philosophy that you and I have had many debates on, of my personal disinterest in repetition, especially in boss battles, in levels, like having to replay levels, really, really annoying to me. Having to refight a boss, really, really annoying to me. And so, for most of what I did of Wilds, I didn't have to fight a couple of them. I think I probably refought 4 or 5, maybe a couple more of the bosses as we were helping each other get through it. And the multiplayer of this is structured to where you can only fight together the lowest level bosses when you're in the early game. That whoever's lowest in your party, you have to fight on their level, which makes sense. That's fine. But I think I probably would have dropped the game way earlier if I had to fight the fucking Chatacabra or whatever the shit like 4 times in order to move on to the next one, or if that was just like a general part of the structure, is that I was fighting these monsters multiple times. That is something that is personally very intensely unappealing to me, and so it was definitely a good choice, in my opinion, for the type of player that I am, to have this 15-hour introductory one boss, then the next boss, then the next boss. Whether that is representative of what the pre-Wilds appeal of the series seems like it's not, but that is a Wilds forward appeal to me that the other games seem like they probably wouldn't have had.
Well, I mean, also Rise, for what it's worth, is also very easy.
Sure.
In Rise, when I was playing, again, I was getting more on board, but I didn't really have any grasp of the game to even an intermediate level. I was just wearing whatever armor looked the coolest, using whatever weapon looked the coolest, and I got through the game. You can do the same in Wilds to an even easier degree.
Sure.
But when you're playing an older title, you really are going to get your teeth kicked in if you don't prepare. And I think that to me that's really interesting.
Sure.
And I had mentioned to you that I think that there's an appeal to this game similar to fighting games. And I was watching a little bit of Maximilian Dude's review earlier today, which is, I think, indicative of that crossover. You know, this guy who is here to talk about fighting games. Obviously, he has a deep love for Capcom and a love for Monster Hunter, but that crossover, I think, is apparent because for me, the fun still, even though it's less essential to come in with the right elemental weapon type and the right armor set in Wilds, I still want to because it still gives me a leg up in those times when I don't have anybody to play with. Refighting a monster and learning through the monster guide and learning through my on the job experience against against any monster, understanding what parts of their body to target to get which materials, understanding what their tells are that they are getting weaker, understanding what their different moves are, all of that, the way you come to master a fight against a monster, the same way you master a matchup in a fighting game, to me is very compelling, particularly because there's a material reward there that I can then take and apply to that next bigger, tougher monster. Again, it's not strictly necessary, at least in low rank. By the time you get to high rank, I found myself needing to do that more. But I think it's interesting because I want to talk with you about the high rank because I think in some ways you would find it very interesting, but in other ways I think you would find it very unappealing. Because a good portion of high rank is refighting stronger versions of these monsters, either called frenzied or tempered, depending on how strong they are, to make variant versions of that same equipment that you got in low rank, or higher tiered versions of those same weapons to push further into that half of the game, which is a lot more grindy and a lot more, I would say, again, and please let me know in the comments, because I'm assuming or hoping that this video gets out a little bit more. So if you're a Monster Hunter fan and I'm getting things wrong, please let me know, because I'm also trying to learn more about the series as I go along. But this sort of mandate, this mandate, although a much softer mandate than past games.
If I started like coming up with shit and I was like, no, that's wrong, this is what happened, then I would be steering.
But see, I know that you don't know that information, so I
might have done a lot of research last night. You don't know what I was up to. I was watching a 1915 movie, but you know.
But this grind element to the high rank, to me, I think it's a little bit closer to foreground in the importance of the Monster Hunter gameplay loop that has persisted across the whole series, even if it's been made less obvious in the journey to the credits in particularly Rise and then Wilds.
So sorry, what's the question?
I'm just talking. I didn't really have a question.
Oh, okay. Well, well,
put it to you this way. I'll ask you a question if you want. Okay. You don't have to tie my hands.
And I don't have to answer either. I can just move on.
I guess that's also true. You could object. We've talked about sort of the structure of refighting monsters, but if I'm right, you're not crazy about the actual combat either.
No, but I actually do want to. We can get to that, but the idea of me playing Monster Hunter to the point that is apparently from what I know, what Monster Hunter fans really like, which is these higher rank missions, is that repetition, is the upgrading of the armor and in the refighting the battles to then get to the next stronger guy. Another reason that I felt very unmotivated to get through the game even further, and again, I didn't even finish the campaign, is that if that is where the game really unlocks and where a lot of people find their personal value and their time sink, especially in Monster Hunter, I am very confident that would make me like the game even less, because nothing on a very subjective why I play video games level, nothing about that sounds fun at all to me. The idea that you are fighting multiple of the same guy, which is okay, you know, I've done that in video games before. That's not a complete deal breaker. But the idea that you're doing this so that you can then do like a variant of your armor set or a +1 to your weapon to then fight the next guy that you've already fought that is the same guy but stronger is like a death spiral for me. I'm like, and this is, I don't want to like super exaggerate. I understand these series and these games have an appeal, but
Yeah.
I can't get my head around that. Like, I remember one time you having a conversation with me about why you found certain RPG elements of 2018 God of War to be very unappealing to you. That's not a game you've played through. It's a game you put down because you didn't really like it, which is totally fine. And part of your complaint there was that Kratos opens a chest and he finds a fucking +4 leather bootstrap, and you put that on, you don't really feel any particular progression. You don't really feel like that was satisfying to you or rewarding. And I do understand that. That's not like my favorite part of that game either. I never even think about it when I'm thinking about that game. But I'm curious to you what the difference is between the RPG mechanics and finding a ice a chest plate or whatever in God of War versus getting a slightly stronger version of the same weapon in Monster Hunter, or a slightly more meatier, hardier version of the armor in Monster Hunter, because that is, for me, it seems like that's the appeal of Monster Hunter, is that getting that next armor set so that you can then go fight the next guy. And I'm like, well, I don't care about the armor in the first place, so why would I want an armor that is 5 points more health to just go fight another guy that has 10 points more health? Like, it just seems like super, super cyclical to me in an incredibly unappealing way.
I mean, my answer is going to make me sound like an asshole, but I don't mean it to be. It's not, that Monster Hunter and God of War are different games.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
And the reason I say that is because I wasn't playing God of War for that, and I felt like God of War had systems and a way of pacing itself that kind of got between what I wanted out of the game and what it was. I'm not coming to Monster Hunter under any pretense other than what it's going to be.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that the grind is interesting to me, in the same way that like the grind for light level in Destiny is interesting to me, in that it's built on a foundation that I like a lot.
Sure.
I think that from like a higher level, Monster Hunter is really good at, if you're up for the grind, metering it in the right way.
Yeah.
To where
I invited
you're
my
going.
Palico, by the way.
You did.
Hello.
Very apt. It's sort of
Monster Hunter's fucking stupid. Sorry. Whoa. Hold on. Hey, that's me. Don't say that.
The amount of carves you can get, the way you can learn how to maximize that by improving in combat. The number of hunts you're going to have to do to unlock that next armor set or weapon you need to take on that monster. To me, it's all just tuned quite well.
Sure.
And this is just something that obviously has been refined over decades.
Yeah.
This is actually the 20th anniversary of Monster Hunter. The first game was on PS2 in 2005. So I think that's just tuned really well. But this does invite, to me, the point about the actual combat.
Sure.
Which I just think is really satisfying. I don't feel a sense of repetition in the game because I just simply enjoy fighting these monsters.
Yeah.
And the reason I think that's the case is because the way the game lets you specialize is very exciting. Obviously, it's kind of in the tradition of a character action game, 100%.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
But even more so than a game like Devil May Cry, where you might have a lot of you might have a big arsenal, a lot of utility among it, a lot of a lot of Dante's or Nero's weapons are largely funneled towards the same purpose, and a lot of them are just variants on the same combo tree. What to me is really cool about Monster Hunter is the way you can specialize to approach a monster in the play style that fits you the best.
Yeah.
For instance, the way I like playing this game in particular a lot is with the hammer. And playing hammer, I have a totally different role than somebody who's got a sword or a bowgun or anything. I gotta go after the head. I gotta get head breaks. I gotta do a sort of a particular pool of combos that I know that only the hammer really has access to knock the monster unconscious a couple times in a fight. But then there might be another monster where I know, okay, I want to make like the Rathian armor set. I need like a Rathian wing. the only way I'm going to get that is if I switch off my hammer to my longsword and target the wings and the breakpoint in the wings that the hammer can't exploit to get this material.
Yeah.
So the way I can like specialize, and then the way the game also forces me to jump out of the thing I've specialized into something else to get a material I'm after. I think it does a lot to, if you're willing to fight the same monster again, if you're willing to view it like a fighting game and view it as an enemy you're rematching opposed to a boss you're doing again, which I think is a subtle but key difference. The game does give you a lot of reason and a lot of space to experiment and express yourself as you can in character action, but enough rules that you have to force yourself to do something different in the combat, which I really like.
Yeah, I thought... I think what's interesting with my relationship to the combat in Monster Hunter is I think that is the element of it that I had the least issue with. The spectacle of these boss fights, doing it with you guys, stumbling around, shooting up the flare, and having the NPCs come in to help me and all this stuff. The actual fights of Monster Hunter Wilds are easily the most fun that I had with the game. It's basically everything else around that I have much stronger issues with.
Sure.
Though I actually think that the amount of issues I have with the structure around it makes me significantly less interested in the combat itself. You were mentioning that a lot of the incentive to experiment and learn combos better and try different weapons and just test the limits of the game a little bit more are to get the wing so you can get the next headpiece that needs the wing to get the headpiece. And my issue is again obviously a very subjective one, but is I don't want that headpiece. Why would I want that headpiece? Because and again it's the cyclical nature of it. It feels like there is no ultimate goal other than get number bigger so I can get number bigger. And obviously this kind of what you were saying with the grind for like Destiny Light levels or like World of Warcraft things, is like ultimately if you enjoy the gameplay, the number is a representative of how much effort and time you've put into it, rather than a goal necessarily in and of itself. But that I think breaks for me when specifically I found the armor very unappealing in this game. From what I know of the early game, I haven't completed the campaign section, you can't transmogrify your outfits. I think you can later on. Someone told me that. And you might have even, I don't know, can you do that in the early game or am I wrong about that?
You can in the early game, you can in high rank.
Okay. So my complaint is valid for the amount of time I played the game.
Yeah.
I think that so many of the fucking armor outfits are so gaudy that they're incredibly unappealing to me, but I'm forced to use them because they have higher stats than the ones that I think fit better in the world, which are the earlier ones, which is like there's like the Hope set or whatever. I think it's the first one. Like the first 4 or 5, I'm like, okay, I can see someone in this world wearing this and not looking like a jackass to everyone around them. But as soon as I start putting on an armor set, especially when it's like mixed matched together because I haven't gotten a complete one, I've got like these big yellow dreadlocks and spikes coming out of a fucking crazy hat, and I'm like, I wouldn't want to be around this fucking person. I don't want my character to look like this, but I need to do it because this one has 70 HP and the one that I want to actually look like has 5. And so on a very personal level, the aesthetics of the higher progression monster armor sets were visually unappealing to me. And so I had no reason to want to get them because I knew on like just a very base level, like no gameplay or modifying whatever, that they weren't going to look appealing to me. But then also I find the idea of needing the higher armor set or the +4 weapon to be kind of self-defeating, in my opinion, because you need the higher level defense and weapons to fight the stronger guys, but then it's like, but they're stronger, so it's like it kind of negates and they do more damage and they have more health, so like it's really no different. Like you're just forcing me down this path of upgrading that just like it's PEMDAS. It fucking cancels each other out, and so that cycle I just find incredibly unappealing because I don't feel progression when I get the +4 armor set, +4 weapon, whatever, because the next guy I'm gonna fight is gonna be plus 5 health, plus 5 damage. Well, I'm obviously simplifying, but it cancels you out so strongly that I'm like, I don't really think there is much of a progression on on a personal self. I don't feel like I've really grown at all because it balances out so equally.
Yeah, I mean, you said something interesting to me a long time ago when you were playing one of the Halo games, might have been Halo 2, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Where you said something like, well, why would I even care about the weapon sandbox or anything because I can just walk past enemies.
Yeah.
And I think about that sometimes because I'm like, well, that's actually a really interesting criticism of a game.
Yeah.
Because in reality, if you want to walk past them, you can.
Yeah.
And
which is what I did in some of the Halo games was fucking annoying. Which, to the game's credit, it's not fun to do that. But I found it even less fun to fight the guys, which is why I did it.
I kind of feel like this is just like it's to me it's a similar thing in this situation where it's like, well, if you're playing Halo, you're probably playing it because you like the gunplay. If you're playing Halo but you don't like the gunplay, then I guess you can walk past a monster. Yeah. I kind of think it's a similar thing here, where either it's going to interest you or if it does, or it doesn't. Mm-hmm. And if you're playing Monster Hunter and the idea of grinding for a different elemental weapon, or the next complete set with a certain elemental resist or a certain set of perks isn't compelling to you, then it's just not.
Yeah.
And
again, that's I agree with that, and I hope from everything I'm saying, I'm not saying this is inherently poorly designed and no one can like it or whatever.
Right.
I do think it is poorly designed. I'm like, I don't see any incentive here as someone who's played many video games, but I also understand that this is I don't have an internal motivation. I don't connect to this gameplay loop. It doesn't inspire me to want to learn it deeper, and that's really where the disconnect is. But I hope that's clear.
Yeah, and it just is a game in the style of a lot of sort of pseudo MMOs like this, where there is simply a great depth to the systems, but you can walk around that depth if you want to. And if you walk around it, it's a functional experience. It's maybe not a rewarding experience.
Yeah.
It's sort of how I feel about a series like Xenoblade.
Sure.
I can play Xenoblade, and when it comes to the combat, I can be in the shallow end and I can functionally get through the fights. Yeah. But that's not really like me unlocking a lot of the depth of Monster Hunter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what I've found playing Wilds, having, again, played some in the past, is that depth, I feel like I'm ready to wade into it, where I wasn't ready, certainly playing World, and I also wasn't really ready playing Rise.
Yeah, from what I recall, you kind of largely stopped after like the core campaign of Rise. Like you didn't.
Yeah, I played a little bit after it, but it really was not in a very major way. Yeah. I was still really just getting my feet wet when Monster Hunter still playing Rise. But now that I'm sort of realizing that there is actually a Pokemon style elemental system in the game, and that's a pretty core component of it. To me, it's quite fun saying, okay, well, I need to go up against this Balahara, and I want to bring a Thunder Hammer here with paralysis, and because he's weak to paralysis, I want to paralyze him. So if I want to do that, I need to go get these other materials, and I need to get this weapon, and then I'm going to be able to do this type of damage to the monster. Yeah, I get why that's not appealing, but for me, sort of looking through the systems, parsing out the weaknesses of the monsters, understanding the tree, and kind of getting to grips with just how the systems work in the first place, to me was quite fun, because it's just sort of like learning a new skill. Sure. You don't have to do it, and you can just sort of force your way through. But to me, there is a satisfaction in understanding what's going on under the surface. Yeah. But I had to consciously want to do that. I don't think Rise is good at making you do that. Wilds. If you're sorry, I meant to say Wilds.
Okay. I'm just making sure, because I didn't know if there was something different in Rise that I was unfamiliar with.
If you're playing Pokemon, even the easier Pokemon games, if you show up with a type disadvantaged team to the gym battle, you might make it through, but it's not going to be pleasant, and it's going to be obvious the fact that the type matchups are important. Monster Hunter doesn't make that obvious.
Sure.
And I think that there's a deeper joy to the strategy, the prep work, and the combat when you understand those systems, but you have to want to. And I think that when you're playing Pokemon, team composition is fun. You could run in with a overpowered normal type team and be fine against 90% of Pokemon. But that's less fun than crafting that team just right to synergize with each other and take out the enemy. With type advantage and with good strategy. That same appeals in Monster Hunter. It's just not as overt, I don't think.
No, and that's definitely fair. Again, that's obviously something that, 10 hours in one game is not enough time for me to fully wrap my head around that. A lot of my time with this game, frankly, was like fumbling around, be like, what do the menus do? Who do I need to talk to do this? Like, what's the upgrade tree? Like, she gives me advice, and then some of these menus like show us the same thing, and some of them show sort of different things. And I was messing around with the inventory. A lot of it was, I think, for someone who has never touched one of these games before, and again, I don't have enough information to know how different or better or worse it necessarily is from the previous games. A lot of this game, because it is trying to do so much, and there are so many subtle systems that aren't readily apparent, for a newcomer looking at these menus and the structure of the game, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that is another thing that, as I mentioned earlier, makes it hard for a lot of people to get in, even if they do eventually become big fans. Those first hours, which are really what I'm talking about here, are incredibly overwhelming. And so because these elements that I think I could find satisfying, where I am understanding the elemental type advantages and things like that might help me feel a little bit more powerful, or like I have an edge, because they're not particularly introduced in the 10 hours that I played of this game, I really had no idea that those were there. And I was struggling so much with just understanding the game that I wasn't able to appreciate those elements that I do certainly believe are there, and I think I could learn to appreciate. But again, ballooning this out from the combat to the larger scope of the game, which is really where the majority of my criticisms lie, I reflect on this experience and with other games that actually you've brought up today that I like a little bit more, and trying to parse out why I prefer those games over this one. And I do think that for me, combat in games in general, across my interest in video games, is very, very low on the totem pole in terms of why I want to play a game, why I want to engage with it on a deep level. And
Pokemon's a great example of this in particular.
Yes. You mentioned Pokemon and you mentioned Souls games. And those are two of my favorite series. Can't get enough of them. Can't get enough of watching videos, learning about the community, all this stuff. Do not care about the combat in any of those games. Bloodborne, Dark Souls, fucking name 20 Pokemon games. My favorite games of all time. But the combat is not why I find those games engaging. And I appreciate the combat fine enough. And especially in Souls, I do find it decently fun. But it's not why I play those games. It is the surrounding structure, pacing, world design, lore, these things that create a context for me in which I'm doing the combat, that I'm like, well, I need to do this. I want to see the next area. I want to see the next monster. I want to, catch them all this stuff. And Monster Hunter Wilds, obviously is the one I played, I don't think the greater structure of this game, again, in what I've played, I found that even less compelling than I did the combat, because this is my criticism of the campaign of Wild. The structure of this campaign, I think, is really fucking boring. It is lots of long cutscenes with these characters who are, I'll say at best, decently well written, but at most, for most of them,
I think it's sufficient writing.
Yes, sufficient, but not particularly exciting, not particularly engaging. And there's these long cutscenes. So you watch a long cutscene, and then because this early game doesn't require you to do too much build crafting or learn too much about that, because I was able to get through all the bosses that I did. I didn't need to get super deep into that. So I was never pushed to learn about that. And then you just hop on your Sacred and it walks you to the next boss. It felt so on rails to me, and so the world felt very lifeless, very rote, very like I'm just going from thing to thing. And I do think that from what I know, this is specifically an issue with Wilds in an area where I will certainly say it is possible that I prefer the older games in terms of their structure. That Sacred walking you automatically to the next area really, really kills the engagement for me. Because the world then felt like this series of corridors that my guy was just walking me through, and then I would show up at the boss arena and then start the battle. And that cycle was a cycle of death for me. It's like, I don't care about these characters. I can just like kind of tune out and like look at my phone while the Sacred walks me to the next boss. Then I do the boss and I get 20 fucking bongos toenails, and then I get to go get a +5 hammer. It's like every step of that, but particularly everything outside of those boss battles, which I do think were decently fun, was kind of deflating. It was like, oh, that's what this game is, or at least that's what this part of this game is. I think it's not a very good way to engage a player in this first 10-15 hours, especially a new player.
I've got a couple of observations about this, because I don't disagree with almost anything you said. I think that the Sacred is a worse mount than the Palamute, in my view, in every dimension except for design, personally. Yeah. I think that...
We just call them chocobos. Like, I'll get on the chocobo.
I think that I've got kind of two thoughts about this.
Sure.
Beyond widely agreeing with everything you're saying. And to be clear, even though this is, to me, is a 5-star game, it's a 5-star game for me. I skipped every cutscene of the game. I have no idea what the story of the game is about. I identified
I sat my white ass down and listened whenever Gemma was on screen, though.
Yeah, I didn't. I think I identified 3 hours in the game that I didn't care about any of this, and I skipped all of it. And also, for context, it's also why a game like Portable Third was interesting to me, because there is basically no preamble in that game. There's basically no story. Now, a lot of Monster Hunter games do have an involved story, just not doled out this way.
Yeah.
But I don't even... To me, there's not even that much to talk about with the story, because I'm on the same page with you. The writing is sufficient. The structure of it is bad.
Yeah.
But there's two things
I'll quickly respond about the story. I say all this as a big criticism of Wilds, and part of the reason why I found it deflating, as I said, to play. But I also think it was the right decision to make, because I would have been significantly less interested in a Monster Hunter game that didn't bother with story, because story and world building is very important to me. Of course, if it's done bad, that means it's a detriment, but I can't point to or say which games had good stories or bad stories, because I haven't played them, but foregrounding this cinematic narrative with these characters on concept, I greatly appreciate. It could have easily been the thing to really make me want to get more into this world if I found the characters and story and cutscenes more engaging. But I didn't, so it was a detriment. But I appreciate that they tried it, but I think they handled it poorly.
Ed Nightingale wrote today for Eurogamer a news article. The headline is Monster Hunter Wild's popularity is due to emphasis on story, says series producer. Now, this is like you have to I think it's a Japanese interview, so I don't know exactly how you can go about getting this information, because I also think it's in a Japanese magazine, so I really just have the headline here.
Sure.
But the series producer, Ryozo Sugimoto, I believe, I didn't want to mispronounce his name here, basically claimed that the success of this game is in large part due to the fact that it has a more engaged narrative than the series has ever had, even though the more recent games, even a little bit prior to World, had more involved stories in the past.
Sure.
You make a good point, and I think that this is part of what interests people.
Yeah.
I think that they just simply didn't know how to implement it.
Yeah.
And it speaks to me to what is maybe the reason that, to me, this is I don't know what Monster Hunter you would pick other than this to get into, but it's still not an ideal entry point.
Yeah.
They removed friction. They removed almost no systems. Does that make sense?
Sure. No, I think that's probably true. The systems are still there, but you're not forced to engage with them.
It's not even,
frankly, you're not really taught about them.
If you go back to, again, I'm going to keep citing Portable Third just because that's my best touchstone for pre-World Monster Hunter. But a lot of systems in that game are annoying. A great example is crafting. In that game, when you start out crafting, you can fail a crafting. You can have the ability, you can have the items, but you don't have the ability to do the craft. 10% chance you fail, you can fail it and lose those items.
Which you did.
You have to,
I was on a call when you failed one of your. God, what the hell?
Yeah, and you have to buy these books that raise your chance of a successful craft.
Yeah.
And what it's doing in a way through its systems is telling a story of a hunter who's new in town, doesn't know how to do this, and then literally learns by reading books and gets better at it.
And that sounds interesting to me. I don't know if I would have fun with that, but I appreciate that in concept.
Yeah, and so a lot of the storytelling and a lot of the friction were hand in hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm playing Portable Third. I get my teeth kicked in by a monster that was a breeze and rise. Suddenly I realize, okay, the game is telling me a story here of overcoming big obstacles. And to see that story through, I have to see these mechanics through, and I need to understand how everything works in harmony and how to improve my stats, improve my gameplay, improve my preparation, improve everything.
Yeah.
That's friction and it's narrative together.
Sure.
This game has a narrative that anybody can see. It's a very traditional narrative. And it also has every system you'd expect from Monster Hunter that it's always had, but it doesn't have any of the imperative to engage with it because there's very little friction. So I think in some ways it's more accessible because it's easier, but it's in some ways less accessible because you don't understand why you need to engage with this stuff.
Sure.
In some ways, I think the harder a game is to clear a game. Because when you're losing these fights, you have to say to yourself, okay, why? Well, I'm not paying any attention to my gear.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm not doing any prep with my items before the hunt. Yeah. There's all of this stuff that you don't have to ask yourself in this game.
Yeah. Though I also do want to say, for the amount of the game that I played, I only ever lost one fight, and it was for no fault of my own. You were there with me for this.
I'm still not sure what happened there.
Yeah, so to set the stage, to kind of bring in what you were saying, I was never forced to really care particularly much about my armor, though, of course. I was upgrading it. I was getting the best that I could get, and I ended up getting upgraded weapons and stuff. And I did visit my camp to make sure I had enough potions on me or whatever. But I wasn't getting super deep into that. I wasn't really experimenting with the traps. I wasn't really... I honestly, I don't even really know what else you can do in the game. But I wasn't doing it because the game wasn't pushing me to, and I also didn't really have a hard time with any of the fights. I was beating them all on my first try until this one battle that you and I were doing together. And
we knew Udra.
Yeah, and we were playing in, as far as we know, a private lobby. And someone somehow joined our lobby and died multiple times and caused us to lose the fight, even though that we hadn't died enough times to cause us to lose the fight. And we don't know how this person got in there, how they kept dying, but it made us lose like maybe 30 seconds before we would have beaten this thing. And that was so deflating to me, not only because that meant I would have to refight this 10, 15-minute long boss battle again, but also because it was of no fault of my own or my skill level or my preparation that it didn't teach me anything to lose that, other than I don't know what the fuck happened or how this guy got in here.
Yeah, that was... I'm still just not sure what happened. Yeah. I'm still not even sure he died enough times. I'm not positive it wasn't just a communication error.
Yeah.
But no matter how you cut it, I think... I mean, that was the point that pushed you out of the game, which is fair.
Yeah.
As a sidebar, the hunts in this game are quicker than they've been in a lot of games, which is also interesting and something that I'm really excited about personally when I'm playing more of the older games. And I'm getting into hunts. Even I was getting into them in Portable Threat a little bit, where you're into 20 minutes, you're into 30 minutes. These really big, massive engagements against a monster, which again also more friction, even more frustrating when you die, even more tension and engagement when you're in that fight.
Sure.
But the other point I wanted to raise, because I had the 2 points. One is all the systems without the friction. The other one is I want to draw into conversation Pikmin 4.
Sure. Oh, definitely.
Which, similar to this game, has an error or makes an error in judgment as to where to put the credits. Because I really think that the idea of beating this game when you see the credits is extremely deceptive. The same way in Pikmin 4, if you stop playing when you hit those credits, you would miss out on some of the best in the content in the game, and not end game content, content that continues contiguously from exactly where you were before the credits. Yeah, I think that's a mistake.
I never even got to credits, so this is a criticism that I have no connection to, but I believe it, and I can certainly understand the Pikmin 4 comparison.
Because it's not just saying, okay, you beat the game and now here's some other tangential stuff to do. in Pikmin 4, it's, hey, here's the next of, 6 or 7 key areas in that game. And then in this game, it's you finish the credits after chapter 3. You start chapter 4 when the credits are done. And so this brings into conversation something else you said on Twitter that I've really been mulling over.
Okay.
You said something like, Monster Hunter fans aren't allowed to tell JRPG fans to go fuck themselves when they say it gets good 20 hours in. Yeah. And I think that this is where the issue of where the credits are placed comes into conversation, because I think you're right in that there is no material difference, in my view, between the journey from the very start of Wilds through to the end of High Rank. It's no different than playing a 60-hour JRPG.
Sure.
And I think in both cases with the games of these lengths, this is not a 60-hour game to see the end of the High Rank. I'll probably do it in 45 hours in that ballpark. It's not a 60-hour JRPG, but it's a long game. Yeah. And I think that to an extent, it's fair to say 15 hours in, when you hit those credits and end the game of Wilds, I think it's very fair that there's going to be more mechanics and ideas that continue to open up the game more and more from that point. I just think that Capcom did a disservice to everybody by giving you that off ramp.
Yeah, sure.
Not because you should be forced to sit down and play more of the game, but because I think that prepares you to really enjoy the high rank content.
So what do you mean? Like if you do all that first bit, then you can enjoy the rest of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can enjoy the build.
Sure. Yeah. I think that my problem with that is that I don't think that that's true, because if that first 15 hours before the credits roll, whether that's the right place to put them or not, being so linear, so scripted, so on rails with the sacred and all that, does that actually reflect what I will be doing for the next 40 if I continue past that? Does it actually prepare me to do that? If it doesn't teach me the mechanics, it doesn't push me to learn all the different systems that it has. I make the comparison to the complaint that a lot of people have for JRPGs. I mean, it gets good 20 hours in, because usually those games have so many systems that they're teaching you that it's very difficult to get your head around until you've played a significant chunk of the game, to where they start to harmonize and you realize why they are giving you so many things. This game actually has the opposite thing, where it doesn't force you to learn any of the things, and then in my mind I'm like, okay, well, if I do this 15-hour thing and let's just say I continue on and consider it in my head a good chunk of the game, or like an actual chunk of the game that I need to play for whatever that means, and I haven't been pushed to learn about most of the mechanics of the game that are really going to make me care about it in those first 15 hours, and those first 15 hours are so on rails that they're actually not representative of the next bit, and I find those first 15 hours so unappealing because of its structure, then how does it prepare me to appreciate the rest of the game?
Yeah. I mean, it's preparing you in the sense that in that time, you're going to understand how to fight a monster, and you're going to understand the layouts of the maps and everything, and then the game is going to throw things that are more challenging at you. I think that, to me, it's a semantics difference, but a meaningfully different conversation if you quit in chapter, I don't know what chapter you're in, you're probably early chapter 3 or in chapter 2.
I was in 3, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be a meaningful semantics difference if you quit in chapter 3 in a game in which you saw credits after 6 chapters. Mm-hmm. Just because I think that it's not that the game isn't, put it to you this way, the game's onboarding is bad. I totally agree with that. But I disagree that you're not learning in that time period.
Sure.
Whether it's because you're prompting it yourself, because you're just interested to learn the systems, or because just by accident you get a handle on the loop, you get a handle on what items you want to bring, you get a handle on crafting, all this stuff.
Sure.
It is teaching you to play the high rank missions. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you get to high rank, it's been both over and understated how different it is. Mm-hmm. Sure. Even by me. Whoa. Because even when you start high rank, you have to do things like capture monsters instead of kill them. Mm-hmm. And that's something you could have been doing in the previous time, but it wasn't explained to you until you start chapter 4. And you kind of learn why you would do that. Mm-hmm. so they're still teaching you things,
Sure.
and you're still building on that experience. And what they do is that they present a framework where all of these things that you've become accustomed to become necessary.
Yeah.
A great example is pop-up camps. You can put pop-up camp tents around the maps. So you can change your equipment from there, restock items. If you die, you can if you get carded, you get brought back to your pop-up camp opposed to going back to the base camp.
And you can also teleport between them.
Yeah. It's not super necessary in the low rank stuff, but in the high rank, when you finish a quest, you're not sent back to base camp. You stay out in the world. And so suddenly the dynamic is different. Suddenly your sacred is still, automated, but to an extent you have a lot more freedom of where you're going to go on the map. Suddenly you need to use those pop-up camps to have these little checkpoints to swap around your gear when you're maybe out and about fighting 4 monsters before you get back to the base camp, to talk to Gemma and do blacksmithing and stuff. So I just think that Capcom, I guess my larger point is that I think Capcom has done a disservice by presenting the case for the game being done after Chapter 3.
Sure.
And I think that if nothing else, whether the game has good onboarding or not is for this point but immaterial.
Sure.
I agree that it's bad onboarding.
Yeah.
The systems click better in the later chapters.
Yeah, I believe that.
And it's a continuation. It's a divergence and a continuation at the same time.
I trust that. Yeah.
And so
That's possible.
When people were saying, "Man, this game is totally different in high rank," that's not true. But it is meaningfully opening up to you.
Definitely.
Not dissimilar from how you might play the linear opening of a big Western RPG.
Sure. Yeah.
And then you're suddenly out into the open world. The time scale is obviously different. And the time scale I think is wrong. I think this campaign should have been 5 hours opposed to 15. But the premise is still the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what you said. A lot of that does make sense to me, but I still do think, and I think that you would share this criticism, that it's a lot of the choices were made in the wrong places for this, whatever this campaign low rank is, because a lot of things you were talking about having to utilize capturing monsters, having to utilize the pop-up camps a little bit more, and having a little bit more direction or choice in terms of the direction you go, all of those things sound a lot more appealing to me than the very on-rails 10 hours of this game that I played. And if what I played, which is Sacred, taking you from bit to bit, learning how to fight a monster, introduce you how, here's what blacksmithing is, like, these are really basic things that are frankly pretty representative of things that happen in other games. Like, I've gone to a camp and a guy to upgrade my weapons and, buy potions or whatever. I've done that in plenty of games. I didn't need to be introduced to those elements, especially when the combat is, I've played Souls games before, I've played character action games. These things I didn't need to be taught over 15 hours. These things that you were talking about that I think do sound to me a little bit more appealing and negate a couple of things that I'm complaining about with this. If that had been the first 5 hours of the game, and then the next 5 hours of the game was then introducing you to more variety of pop-up camps and capturing, using nets to capture monsters and stuff, I'm like, okay, then I would have felt a little more sense of progression. But for what I played of 10 hours of this game, 3/4 of the way through that low-rank campaign, there wasn't a lot of change. I was just really going through a repetitive cycle that didn't teach me enough about the things that I could find interesting about the game to encourage me to go further, and that's why I dropped off. Did you want to respond to that, or you got somewhere else?
No, I mean, I would it just reminds me a little bit of how I feel about Persona.
Sure. Oh, totally.
Because I think that...
Well, Persona, that first 10 hours is very emblematic of what the next 50 hours are going to be.
It is, but it's also like, I just think about how long it took me in Persona 5 to even get, we get like a bus at some point.
Oh, in Tartarus, yeah.
Yeah, and I felt like I'd been playing for like 15 hours by the time we got to that bus. But
sure. I'm not saying that Persona 5 especially doesn't have a
100%
a weak opening section, but
I think it just again comes down to, and you'd mentioned this earlier, and I think this is kind of a good place to kind of come up out of the weeds from this discussion a little bit, is expectation.
Sure.
Like, my expectation sitting down to play Wilds was that I'm going to play this game in the course of 2 weeks for 45 hours, and then I'm going to only stop until the next title update comes out. And this, for me, is going to be a game that I'm returning to with each update and with each big expansion, because there'll be a big expansion the same way there was the G-Rank expansion, the same way that used to be a retail box game, and now it's Iceborne or Sunbreak. It's an expansion.
Sure.
I'll return for that. And so it's not a hand-waving of the criticisms of the campaign, because, again, to be clear, I basically share all of them.
Sure.
But to me, I say, okay, well, here's 10 hours of a game I'm going to play for 100.
Yeah.
And it just, I don't know if Capcom really calibrated that well.
Yeah. And I think that's totally fair. Yeah. The one final thing that I want to talk about is the combat itself, and where I find it to be the most appealing part of the game. Another reason I wasn't particularly incentivized or interested in exploring the game further is because I did find it not particularly compelling. And in specific, and I will say, I wasn't able to get into any particular weapon super deep enough level to where you're making a fighting game comparison earlier, where I understood the combos and stuff like that. I tried about 7 weapons over the course of my 10 hours playing the game, so it's like a little over an hour or whatever playing any given weapon. And so not only that, but the reason I was swapping between so many of the weapons, I think there's like 15, 16 of
14.
them. Yeah, I played with a solid chunk of them.
Yeah, played half.
Is because I didn't find the combat to be I just on a base level didn't find it very fun, and specifically because so many of the weapons I felt like weren't really doing anything. And of course that is on a numbers level wrong. I know I am doing damage whenever I hit the guy, but specifically because there's not a health bar on these bosses. And I was trying in my mind to think about why I would not be particularly miffed to fight a Elden Ring, Dark Souls, Bloodborne boss 10 times if I need to or more to beat them, as I have done because I've beaten multiple Souls games. And those battles probably take 10 minutes more than that. Like, it's probably on a timescale kind of similar to Monster Hunter. And the answer to me is specifically because I don't know how much progress I'm making in any given any given Monster Hunter battle with any given move that I'm doing. The number shows up where I'm like, okay, I did 3 damage if I hit it on the side. I did 5 damage if I hit it in the head. I'm just inserting numbers, but I think you get the idea.
Yeah.
But whenever I was using whatever weapon I was using, I felt like I was just hitting them until something happened. And I couldn't tell if any attack or any combo I was doing was making a particularly large amount of progress. Or even if I were to get into the build crafting and get like an electric weapon to do something, to do more damage, I didn't know how to tell if I was going to need to do more damage or not, because there's no indication in terms of a health bar that I am making any significant progress. And the reason why Souls battles, I think, can feel very engaging and addicting to me to want to make that next thing is I know not only where I messed up, but how close I was to beating it. And that is something I didn't really lose in Wilds, as I said, but that is something I consistently felt pushing me away from the game, is I couldn't tell what kind of progress I was making with any particular attack that I was doing, and for me, it made them feel very, very weightless. It was like I'm just hitting a pencil against a piece of paper a bunch and hoping something happens, hoping a scale falls off, or hoping that because as all the battles that I did hit that 1/3 or 2/3 mark where they scurry off and you have to hop on your Saker to chase them. Frankly, that simple change of adding a health bar, I think, for me, which I know this is incredibly controversial for Monster Hunter fans, but for me would make a world of difference. Like I think almost all of my problems with the combat would be completely negated if I could just simply tell how much damage I was doing and how much progress I was making in these battles that do last a long time, but they last a long time and I don't know how far into them I am, so I feel like they last even longer.
Yeah. I think that the case you're making makes sense. I think that's going. I think though that goes against what the game wants you to do.
Sure, I think that's definitely possible. Yeah.
And I don't want to just make it a this is what the game wants and you're presenting a difference. I'll make it this. What the game wants is interesting to me.
Yeah.
Which is to say that the monster does have a health bar.
Yeah.
But the health bar isn't a big UI element on top of the screen. It's also why I think that the game is better with the damage numbers turned off.
Sure, yeah, totally fair.
Like it used to be in Monster Hunter. The reason I say that is because, and again, this is a sort of thing that I don't think you can really get on your first fight with a monster.
Sure.
Which is not saying you played it wrong, but again, saying to me that I think Capcom telegraphed something incorrectly here.
Sure.
The utility of a health bar, I think, in large part in a Dark Souls fight, is that you're just trying to you're trying to kill that boss once, and you're hoping you never see that guy ever again.
Yeah. And for most cases, that is true. You're not intended, or usually can't even fight them multiple times.
But when you fight the monster for the first time in a Monster Hunter game, it then, and this game has a much clearer sense of all of this that I'm about to say than the past games did.
Yeah.
You get an entry in your field log about that monster.
Sure.
And you can go through it and you can learn all kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's
like an actually useful Pokedex entry.
Yeah.
Pokedex entries are not fucking useful at all.
is you can learn where the monster's breakpoints are.
Yeah, sure.
And by going after the breakpoints, not only are you going to get different parts, but you're also going to get almost a guide through the combat.
Sure.
And you're going to start to know, okay, when I break the 2 forelegs, when I break the wings, when I get a head break, when I cut the tail off, I have basically moved this much closer to the monster being killed.
Yeah.
And when you add a couple of those, when you sort of do the mental math of this break plus that break plus this environment the monster is in, I can be assured within 2 minutes that I know how long I am till the end of the fight.
Fair enough, yeah.
And I just think that this comes back to, again, an expectation Capcom is setting wrong. Because this appeals even better in earlier games when the hunting of the monster puts more onus on you.
Yeah,
when you're playing Portable Third, the monster's not on the map. You have to, or it's not on the mini-map, it's obviously in the map. You have to go find it in the map, throw a paintball at it, and then it'll show up on your map.
Yeah.
And so then you have even more agency over the fight. And the intent of the no health bar, and I think the intent of a lot of decisions in combat, is to make you feel like you really are that hunter and you're gaining the knowledge about the monster. And over time, you're getting better at it. So it's not just mastery in a fighting game sense. It's almost, again, that link between narrative and friction I was talking about that Wilds, I think, has some trouble with.
You are learning as your character is learning to take on this monster. I totally understand that,
Yeah, and that's where the combat really unlocks. To me, the first fight against any monster, even in Wilds, is just kind of a mulligan. It's, okay, I just got to kill him for the quest. Then my next fight is really the interesting one. That's where I'm going to check through the guide, I'm going to understand where to hit it, and then I kind of have a checklist. Okay, left foreleg done. Okay, right foreleg done. Head break done. Bang. That's the health bar. And I think that's just a different appeal, and I think it's one that's not perfectly conveyed by this game.
Sure. Yeah, and I think all of that definitely does make a lot of sense. Whether... I do think I find that more interesting than what I was presented in the 10 hours that I played of Wilds. I don't think I necessarily find it particularly interesting. I think I find it more interesting than what I got. But then again, it also just comes down to how personally interested you are in doing that grind, because that's really what the larger context and what the larger appeal of Monster Hunter is. And as I've said multiple times, and this is certainly my most base level disconnect from this series, very little about that is appealing to me at all. And so the idea that then I would want to refight the monster, which is already not particularly interesting to me, but let's just say it is, and then basically just hitting a checklist of things that I need to do in the fight, that also doesn't sound particularly appealing to me. It's like, okay, well, I hit the forelegs, and then okay, I did that part. You're describing it, and I haven't done this myself, so I don't know exactly how I'd feel about it, but very little about that sounds appealing to me, but I understand the appeal of it. And so then I also understand why this game is controversial in terms of the Monster Hunter fan base, or where it makes significant changes, whether they succeed or not, which at least I find interesting to talk about.
Because even in the combat, they've added this new system where there are these glowing wounds that
I like that actually a lot.
I think it's a great addition. I think it's one of the greatest additions that this game has offered, because that adds an extra layer to combat. The wounds are like another guide. It's not you can break a wound without using focus mode if you just do enough damage to it.
Yeah.
All that this is basically doing is elucidating some of this progression of the monster's decay to the player through these visual wounds and through these glowing weak points to hit. So I think that they were also trying to add another layer to combat in this way, because if I could make a Abram prediction, if you were to play an older Monster Hunter game, I think you'd be a lot more interested in its structure. Sure. I think you'd be a lot more interested in engaging with its systems. I think you would like the combat a lot less. Yeah, sure. Because there's none of the extra layer of that the wounds provide. Yeah. Obviously, it's there. Again, to be clear, it's not like this is a brand new system. It's like an overlay onto a system that was already there. But without it, your positioning is sort of more opaque. That it's just generally more opaque. And again, it relies more on knowledge than this game does. So
and one
again,
thing I will say is I'm hopeful that Capcom hears the criticisms that especially the hardcore community has of Wilds. Yeah. And I think that there's a very solid chance that the follow-up to Wilds is a better balance of the sort of swing in one direction of more linearity and stripping back the hunting elements that Wilds has, and reintroducing some of those elements in hopefully a more streamlined way, and finding a better harmony between the two styles of Monster Hunter that they've now created that are much more divergent. Because a lot of what you're saying sounds compelling to me, but a lot of what Wilds does that the other ones don't also sounds compelling to me, and so it creates this unfortunate...
You're stuck between them.
Yeah, it creates this unfortunate middle ground where I happen to sit of, well, I don't necessarily like this, but I also don't think I would like that. But I do think that there is a hypothetical middle ground, that I'm not a game designer, and I'm not going to say that this is what they should do or shouldn't do, but that there are things they could do to change that really would engage me more as a player, but it just depends on what direction.
Well, there's an argument that they made that game. It's called Monster Hunter Monster Hunter World.
Oh, sure. I've not played that game, so can't say or not. But that maybe I'll try it.
Yeah. Well, I think we had a very exhaustive discussion of Monster Hunter.
Yippee!
We did it.
How you feeling? How was the Rathalos fight, by the way? I know he's in there.
It's really great.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
It's really great.
Making sure
I fought him a couple times. Fought Rathian a couple times.
Ooh, is that like his lesser-known little brother? Kind of like the awkward, forgotten child?
As I learned, this is some of the lore I was picking up from my friend. Rathian and Rathalos are both similar species. The Rathian's the female version, the Rathalos is the male version.
Okay.
And they've got slightly different behaviors and moves, but...
Wow. That gives me a lot of something to chew on.